Yes, I heard it. Okay. Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome. My name is Christine Flores, and I am a board member of the League of Women Voters of Albany County. I don't know who is on the call that is or isn't a member. And I'll talk just a tiny bit about the League. The New York State League of Women Voters and its leagues across the state are supporting the New York Equal Rights Amendment and are helping to advocate for its passage. Tonight, we will hear from Sasha Ahuja, who is going to talk about the ballot amendment and where it is, what the status is. League members across the state have been joining the coalition, organizing calls and organizing in their communities, and have been getting the word out about the amendment. Before I introduce Sasha, I just want to tell you a little bit about the League. It was founded over 100 years ago. It is a nonpartisan political organization that encourages informed and active participation in government. We work to increase understanding of major public policy issues and to influence public policy through education and advocacy. Our members are from a range of political backgrounds and experiences. You are all welcome here tonight. You can learn more about the League at lwvalbany.org. And for election information, you could go to vote411.org, which has how to vote, where to vote, and information about candidates. So I'm going to introduce Sasha now. Sasha Ahuja is an organizer and advocate from New York City who has run local and national electoral and issue campaigns. She currently serves as the campaign director for New Yorkers for Equal Rights, a ballot initiative committee that will engage voters across New York State to affirm their support for a comprehensive equal rights amendment, which will appear on the ballot in New York in November. Sasha most recently served as National Director of Strategic Partnerships at Planned Parenthood Federation of America and Planned Parenthood Action Fund, where she steered much of the local and national response to the Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization decision, ensuring that Black, Latinx, Native, Indigenous, and AAPI communities most directly impacted by abortion bans were centered in the national response. She has a long history of work in New York and national racial and gender justice organizations and political campaigns. Sasha resides in Brooklyn in New York with her wife, Crystal, and their daughter, Sai. I hope I pronounced your daughter's name correctly. We're very grateful to have Sasha here tonight and to talk about the ballot amendment.
So can I just say something before you start, Sasha? Regarding questions, we are a small group. So I'm thinking, once you finish your presentation, that if you have a question, you can raise your hand either physically or use the reactions. And then I can call on people in order and you can unmute yourself and you can pose the question. So I just wanted to take care of that. So thank you.
Of course. Hi, everyone. Hope everybody is doing well. Thank you so much for being here. You could have been anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate it. Thanks so much for your time today. Again, my name is Sasha Ahuja. I serve as campaign director for New Yorkers for Equal Rights. The ballot initiative committee filed here in the state of New York to pass a comprehensive equal rights amendment this November. Today, we'll do a couple things. I'll talk to you all a little bit about the campaign that we're building, how we are starting to build the infrastructure. We are about 130 some odd days out from Election Day. Of course, tomorrow is the New York primary. And then after tomorrow, there will be just one election that is top of mind for everyone across the country and here in New York. It is it's not lost on me talking to you all this evening on the second year anniversary of the Dobbs decision. So I want to start out a little bit of kind of framing this moment in time, in our history, talk a little bit about what people are facing around the country when it comes to access to comprehensive reproductive health care, including abortion care. I'll tell you a little bit about the campaign. I'll tell you how voters are responding to the ERA when we've talked to them about the ballot measure, and then how to get involved, ways for you to help. I'll say, as I'm jumping in, the League has been one of our most active and most important partners in this fight. Chapters all across the state are sending postcards, hosting events, ready to knock on doors, ready to call voters and talk to folks in their community. And that has been a tremendous asset to this campaign. This campaign is not made up of super powerful, wealthy people. It's made up of everyday New Yorkers, just like you and I, who are eager to make sure that our rights and reproductive freedoms are safe in our state. So thank you all in advance for all the work that you've already done, that I know you're going to do. And I'm so glad to be with you. So I'll jump in. I'll share my screen. I'll alternate between a couple of different slides just to make sure that we're orienting each other and I'm really meeting hopefully your needs. But also we're a small group tonight, so I want this to be as conversational as possible. Okay. So as we mentioned, on the second anniversary of the Dobbs decision, the decision that overturned Roe v. Wade across the country, I want to remind us of the reality that so many people across the United States are facing. This is a map of this country and the reality since Dobbs. 21 states have rolled back access to abortion. That may be all-out ban, a 6-week ban, a 12-week ban, a 10-week ban, a 15-week ban. A ban is a ban is a ban. Thousands and thousands of people who can travel are traveling by taking trains and planes and automobiles to get to time-sensitive healthcare that they need. And then, of course, so many of you know that countless people can't travel and are not able to access that time-sensitive healthcare. Many more are managing, they're self-managing abortions in consult with medical providers, oftentimes across state lines. The situation is dire. 1 in 3 women and trans and non-binary people of reproductive age do not have access to healthcare in their state. And so this is the stark reality that we're facing as of today. Also on this map, you'll see there are a number of states that are putting abortion on the ballot. That is a powerful, powerful thing. So here in New York, we're joining our friends in Colorado and in Maryland, putting proactive measures on the ballot, making sure that although we may not necessarily feel that acute threat of abortion loss or loss in access to healthcare, we're very lucky to live in New York State. We know that that could change at any time, that we could see a repeat of what we saw in 2022 here in New York, where an anti-choice politician came extremely close to taking that governor's mansion. He was committed to rolling back reproductive rights across the state. He did it when he was in Congress. That could happen again. And so it is even more important that we're protecting our rights and our freedoms here in New York, especially when they're not immediately at risk. But of course, there are important defensive fights around the country as well. Florida and Arizona and Missouri and Nebraska and South Dakota, Montana, Nevada are all fighting really, really important defensive fights. They're trying to restore access. And what we're doing here in New York is a little bit different. It's bold, it's ambitious. It is ensuring that we're protecting all of our communities, safeguarding their rights in our state's strongest founding document, our state constitution. So just a reminder of what we're facing in this moment, how important it is that we're putting abortion on the ballot all over the country, and how proud we are that here in New York, we're participating in that and doing that right here at home. So overall, when we look at the country, that map that I showed you, there are 4 strategies that we're embracing to win on our issues. 1, here in this year, in 2024, we want to win expansive, durable protections for abortion this cycle. 2, we want to ensure that abortion is energizing and prominent. I believe that it is. I believe that all the time many of us have spent advising and telling our friends that you should run on abortion, you should run on your support for abortion. Guess what, folks? Can't keep them away this year. Abortion is an energizing and prominent issue, and there's so much more of that to come as the campaign cycle unfolds. 3, and this is really where we see New York, we're also exploring the path for expanded legal frameworks in states like New York. This is where our New York fight, an equal rights amendment, protecting rights and reproductive freedoms, pregnancy outcomes, reproductive health decisions, bodily autonomy, gender expression, sex, sexual orientation, age, disability, national origin, ethnicity, a much wider frame for how we hope to win. And lastly, and importantly, we need to expand the base of people who vote on our issues. We have an incredibly diverse electorate here in New York. 1/3 of our electorate are voters of color. We have the unique opportunity to talk to voters, no matter who they are, in ways that resonate with them, really expanding the base of people who are standing up, being bold, flipping their ballot, voting yes, and standing up on our issues. So hopefully that breaks down all that complexity that you saw on that map. It's 4 simple strategies, not so simple, but 4 strategies that are really explicit. And you see New York certainly in all of these, but especially number 3. So many of you know this already, but let's remind everyone, what is the New York Equal Rights Amendment? The New York Equal Rights Amendment is an amendment to protect our rights and reproductive freedoms, period. Every word in this sentence is used with a great deal of intention. Protect, we want to protect what we have today. Rights, this is broad. We're including so many folks. It's not just about abortion. It's about so many people who've experienced discrimination by the government. And we have to remind people, this is about reproductive rights. It's about abortion as well. And so a quite simple way to communicate what is a little bit more of a complex amendment, and I'll remind everybody what it is that the ERA does. So the ERA is an amendment to our Constitution that adds protections for people experiencing discrimination. You all know this, state after state, court after court have walked back our rights. The ERA is embedding explicit protections in our state's strongest founding document, our state constitution. So today in New York, our rights, are protected in New York in our state constitution on the basis of race and on the basis of religion. It includes a lot of people in just those two categories, but also a lot of people experience discrimination in many other ways. This amendment would explicitly prohibit discrimination on the basis of ethnicity, national origin, age, disability, sex, defined as sexual orientation, gender expression, gender identity, pregnancy outcomes, reproductive health care, and autonomy. So actually expanding that definition of how we define sex discrimination through this much wider lens, saying that if you discriminate against someone based on their pregnancy outcomes, reproductive health decisions, or autonomy in decision-making, that is in fact sex discrimination. And that is a powerful thing. It is broad, it is expansive, it is much more explicit than the federal ERA, and takes that added step of adding those layers of protections here at home. For the first time, we're putting reproductive health in a broader framework for protecting all of our rights and freedoms. Now, again, as I mentioned, our friends in Florida and Arizona and Missouri and Arkansas, they're fighting really, really important defensive fights. And those are important, and we must win those. We must win those. And at the same time, we would argue that we have to also win in a brand new way. We have to also include all communities who experience discrimination in so many ways, and not just sort of revert to that same old privacy framework of Roe v. Wade that for 50 years was then eroded by the opposition, but actually codify our rights through a new framework. And that's where the ERA really, really shines. And that's what we're trying to do here in New York. The ERA goes well beyond those privacy protections that the Supreme Court unraveled in the Dobbs decision. And that's really the underlining issue here and what we're hoping to land. Importantly, Minnesota, Oregon, and maybe Illinois are looking at identical measures on their state constitutions, on their ballots in 2026. And so how we fight, how we win this campaign is going to set a tone for how the rest of the country follows suit to also add these kinds of broad, important, explicit protections for all communities who experience discrimination by the government. So what did we do? Here in New York, last year, just right around this time, we filed what's called a ballot issue committee or a ballot initiative committee in our state called New Yorkers for Equal Rights. We gathered incredibly strong, powerful organizations here in New York. Planned Parenthood organizations are statewide and are national. North Star, the New York Immigration Coalition, the New York Civil Liberties Union, New Pride Agenda, the National Institute for Reproductive Health Action, NAACP, Make the Road New York, 1199, and New York State United Teachers. A broad, inclusive coalition. We have labor unions and civil rights organizations, LGBTQ groups and immigrant rights groups, racial justice organizations, and of course, reproductive health organizations by our side. In addition to these groups, there are over 270 organizations that have signed on to join our coalition, including every chapter of the League of Women Voters across the state. This coalition is broad, it's expansive, and I'll drop a link in the chat after I pause my screen share for you to help us reach out to additional organizations who haven't joined us yet to be part of this fight with us. And importantly, we're on the ballot. Some of you may have seen in the last couple of weeks that the opposition brought a totally baseless, absolutely frivolous lawsuit trying to kick us off the ballot. A lower court decided in their favor. Our attorney general appealed that decision. Just last week, the appellate division in the Fourth Department decided that they had no standing, that the ERA will in fact appear on the ballot here in New York. What this actually meant for us, it was a humble reminder that those same attacks that we've seen in state after state, they're going to do the exact same thing here in New York. We are not safe, or we cannot avoid the opposition coming for us. And after the opposition's lost these fights in 7 out of 7 states, and states like Kansas and Kentucky and Michigan and Ohio, where our side won, the opposition is going to throw everything at us, including right here in New York. So we are incredibly proud that we're on the ballot. It's exactly what we knew would happen. It took a little bit of a spin, but we're ready to fight. So I want to talk a little bit about how New Yorkers are responding to this ballot measure. So I'm going to share some slides with you all. You should still be able to see my screen. All right. So this is some research that we did earlier this year. A couple of slides that really paint a picture of where voters are in talking about this amendment. So we put the ballot language, sorry, the legislative language in front of voters earlier this year, not the ballot language. And I'll talk about ballot language in just a second. There's a whole process there that's actually unfolding right now as we speak. So at face value, if election day were tomorrow, we'd be feeling really, really good. Our amendment starts out with wide support across all demographics, all regions of the state, and nearly 2/3 of support in the House battleground districts, those critical districts that are getting a lot of attention this cycle. So overall, 71% of voters, that top line, are with us. You see strong support across partisan affiliation, including with registered independents and registered Republicans. You see incredibly strong support across most, if not all, demographic groups: white non-college voters, white college voters, Black voters, Latino voters, and then strong support in all regions of the state. But there is some movement. So we start out at that strong 71%. When we feed voters opposition messages, our support drops, and it drops significantly. And this is where you come in. This means that we need to run a really strong campaign and talk to as many voters as possible to make sure that we can lessen that drop. So folks were just fed a battery of opposition attacks that we can expect to see. Certainly we've seen several, and we'll talk about them. That assumes that our campaign isn't running a campaign. That assumes that they're not hearing from anything else or anybody else. And so this drop is what we're looking to prevent. 71 is really, really strong. We start in a great place. And in some ways, that means we might only have some ground to lose. And so this is where we need all of you. We need you to join us in this fight. We need you to be with us and help to build our team and our coalition. So many of you join me for bi-weekly calls on Friday afternoons where we share the latest on the campaign. This is where we need all of you to plug into this work. And so we get these people back, right? We continue to feed them information about what this campaign is and what it is. We get folks back, but this drop off is significant. I want to remind us of what the fight has looked like in other states. Past repro ballot initiative wins can be credited in large part to the fact that our side has just outraised the opposition. We spent more money, we invested deeply, and the reality is that we won. So in Kansas, that was an $11.3 million fight on our side, pretty close to what the opposition raised as well. This is right after Dobbs. Kentucky also followed. We also outraised the opposition here. Michigan was a gigantic campaign, $46.8 million to win in Michigan. Again, outraising the opposition by 200%. And Ohio, last November, Ohio was the only ballot measure sort of at this level that was operating at this scale, a $53 million fight. Now here in New York, we're trying to raise a total of $20 million for this effort. This is an expensive state with the most expensive media market during a presidential election year with really competitive House battleground seats. Talking to voters is expensive, but we have the benefit of a ton of attention on the state of New York, a ton of attention on our elections, and of course, the issue of reproductive rights that is incredibly salient. My last slide on polling. In a low enthusiasm year, this amendment can actually provide a huge boost for key components of our electorate who we know need to turn out. Now, I don't know about you, but I've heard a lot, and everything that I read is that there's really low enthusiasm this year. A lot of folks are inclined to stay home for many reasons. We asked voters earlier this year, compared to voting for political offices like president, are you more motivated or less motivated to vote on this amendment? Overall, 57% of voters are more motivated to vote on this measure than any office, including president. And that is true in double digits among low turnout Democrats, people who don't turn out every single year, younger Democrats, young people who we absolutely need to turn out, and voters of color overall. So we believe that this ballot measure can be a huge lift, a boost to our communities and to our side, give people something to turn out when oftentimes in presidential election years, although there are tons of candidates on the ballot, every cycle, every year, every election, it's been my experience that sometimes New Yorkers take it for granted. We don't always say, hey, this is the most important election of our lifetime. Some people turn around and say, hey, you told me that last year. Well, my friends, every year, to quote my friend LJ Williams at NAACP, every year and every election is the most important election of our lifetime. And so it's our job to remind people of that and how important that is. So we'll have more polling to share with you all very, very soon. I'm going to jump back into my presentation and share a little bit on messaging. So I'm going to drop a document in the chat in just a second that shares the coalition, what we're calling our top line message, how to talk about the ERA. I'll drop this in the chat here. It's loading for just a second, but just really gives you some pointers. This is publicly available. It is for you to use how you wish. Talks about the ERA and gives you a couple of components. So a core message that we're asking you to use when you're talking about this measure. This November, we have to vote yes on the New York Equal Rights Amendment to protect our rights and reproductive freedoms, to keep New Yorkers, not politicians, in charge of our personal decisions. There's a 60-second pitch here if you have some time for a longer conversation with folks. And then our message, define the problem. Across the country, politicians are restricting people's rights and freedoms, including the right to abortion. Here in New York, there are dangerous loopholes in our state constitution that leave us vulnerable to the whims of politicians. The ERA is a solution. Voting yes closes those loopholes. No New Yorker should be discriminated against by the government or have their rights or freedoms taken away. Reminding people of the threat and the urgency, here in New York, opponents of this amendment are dead set on rolling back our rights, just like they've done all across the country. Voting yes ensures our freedoms are protected and our shared values. Vote yes because we, not the government, deserve the freedom to control our lives, bodies, and futures. This November, New Yorkers can go vote yes to permanently protect rights and freedoms. This document will continue to be updated. It's Pride. We're rounding out the month of June. So we have some specific messaging for Pride events, some specific messaging for the Supreme Court decision on mifepristone. Later this week, we'll have some additional Supreme Court decisions, including an important one, on access to emergency health care. Lastly, in this document, there's some really, really helpful, tricky Q&A that I invite you to take some time and look at. Questions like, why do we need to pass this amendment? Abortion's already legal. Any claims that we're hearing, the anti-LGBTQ and specifically anti-trans attacks that we're hearing, how to simply respond to them. Response to this question of the lawsuit that got a lot of play. Questions that you're going to get, of course, does this somehow change the federal immigration system? Does it allow this? Does it allow that? No, those attacks are baseless. And we need to make sure we're responding boldly to folks. So I'll make sure we drop this and also we'll pass along to Christine as follow-up. There's also a do's and don'ts document. I'll drop that as well. Distills a little bit of that that I just covered. Okay, organizing next steps. This is where you all come in. This summer, beginning this Friday, we're launching a series of trainings hosted by leaders across the coalition to prepare our community to engage with the campaign. Please join us. We invite you to sign up, to get trained, to talk about the ERA as confidently as I'm talking about the ERA, talk about this issue in your community. And also so we have a cohort of trainers that are ready, that can join events, show up, attend community meetings and town halls, really expand our capacity around the state. I know so many of you are doing some of this work already, but we want to make sure that you have everything that you need from the campaign. 2, we've started a postcarding program. We invite you to send postcards to voters across New York State. We will send you postcards. We'll send you a list of voters to contact. We'll send you a script if you'd like to use it, to talk to people in your community about how important it is to vote yes. Last, bring us to you. We're on the road show. We're covering a lot of ground. I was in Saratoga Springs on Sunday. We're traveling all over the place to talk to folks about the importance of this ballot measure. We'll drop a link in the chat to register to join us for an event. Tell us with some lead time. Hey, my community's meeting, my book club's meeting, a town hall's happening, a public event is happening. Join us, talk about the ERA. And then lastly, you can, of course, request campaign postcards, posters, palm cards from us. I'll drop that link as well with a whole package. So those are ways to get involved. Before we jump to Q&A, I want to talk about 2 important deadlines. So 1, July 5th. Next Friday, July 5th, which some people are taking off as a holiday. July 5th is the deadline whereby the New York State Board of Elections must publicly post ballot language in a brand new process. This year in New York, all measures that appear on the ballot must be written in what's called plain language in 8th grade reading level or lower. a concise title with a word count, a summary with a word count, and a yes/no statement telling people what the ballot measure would do. Now, the BOE is negotiating that language right now. It's a new process this year. By July 5th, could be before, the BOE has to publicly post ballot language, and then there's a 15-day public comment period that you can participate in. We'll be sending guidance out to our full coalition, and if you're not signed up already, again, I'll make sure that you get that link to sign up. And lastly, our filing deadline, our next big fundraising deadline is July 11th. We're raising money towards this important deadline, and we invite you to join us. And of course, every dollar counts to give a little bit to this campaign. So that's the long and the short of it. I'm eager to take your questions. I'll drop all of those links in the chat in just a second. And thank you all so much. I'll pause my screen share and eager to jump in.
Thank you, Sasha. Do you want us to read you the questions that are in the chat? Yeah, okay. So the first one was from Mary Kate. Explain what the missing components in Roe v. Wade that the New York ERA will address.
Sure. Roe v. Wade was about private medical decisions. It actually didn't specify, sorry, I have a little bit of a delay. Can folks hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Great, okay. Roe v. Wade was about private medical decisions, not about protecting rights and not about protecting access. And importantly, Roe v. Wade actually never guaranteed access, because right after Roe v. Wade was passed, an amendment to our federal budget was introduced, the Hyde Amendment, that restricts federal funding for abortion. So what good is a right if I'm somebody who lives in a state and is on Medicaid, and federal Medicaid dollars never actually cover that care? This is actually winning in a brand new way, explicitly codifying people's right to be protected against discrimination by the government if they choose to get an abortion based on their age, their disability, their national origin, their ethnicity, a much kind of different view of how to fight and win on our issues.
So and I think it sounds like Roe v. Wade was a definition that was carved out by the lawyers for the Supreme Court. This is making an explicit statement of protection.
Exactly, and outlining exactly the specific communities that experience discrimination who should be protected.
Okay. And Mary Kate asked also, do you, going back to the slide with the polling, do you know what the gender distribution is for approval of the amendment? Was it polled based by gender?
It was. We do have that gender breakdown. I have a different version of these slides that has it handy. So if you give me a couple minutes, I'll be able to pull that up in a second.
Thank you.
Sasha, this is Mary Kate. I just wondered, was it as we expected that women were more in support than men?
Women were more in support than men, although men are supportive of abortion access. Men are
Okay.
supportive of abortion access. I think the important thing that we're exploring as we're going into the next phase of research is how to talk about an amendment like this and to invite men to see themselves in this amendment when they may not feel directly represented. It's been fascinating actually to hear and listen to some of the focus groups that we've been holding. Men feel deeply impacted by the rollback to reproductive rights. And that's true across race and across geography in our state. We did focus groups at the very beginning of the year, and folks are connecting the dots regardless of their age, their gender, their sexuality, and their life experience. Folks are clear that what we're seeing in Washington is abhorrent, that what's happening in states around the country where we're banning access to IVF, where we're banning potentially very soon access to emergency abortion care is absolutely unacceptable. I think the thing that we're up against, quite frankly, is a little bit of complacency. People tend to think, in New York, nothing could happen.
No.
And I might remind you that in 2021, we had really important voting rights measures on the ballot, as the league knows all too well. And we didn't really run a campaign around that. We dropped the ball in the final 6 weeks before the election. One single donor dropped $5 million into the New York State Conservative Party, ran a campaign only upstate, and they defeated those ballot measures. We can't take it for granted. We all know what happened in 2022 when there was a really close election for governor. We cannot take anything for granted.
The other there's another question here about what what are the most likely changes to ballot language that we are going to see?
Sure. So we don't have any language from the BOE yet. And so we've recommended language. We did some polling. We talked to voters. We wanted to make sure, most importantly, that what voters see is true to the intent of the ERA. It reflects what the ERA is trying to do. And then second, it's compliant with this brand new law. Trying to even distill, this amendment will protect you on the basis of age, disability, gender expression, blah, 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 blah. Doesn't actually fit into the 8th grade calculator. It breaks the calculator. So we had to figure out a way to communicate those kinds of protections quite simply to voters so that they can understand. And also, voters request ballots in languages other than English. And so we want to ensure also that when that ballot language translates into Spanish or to Chinese or to Bangla or to Creole, that it also is simple, and what's written in English can also easily be translated into other languages. I see Peter's question too. I can address that. Yes, the appeal is discretionary, not as of right. Of course, we are prepared if this goes to the Court of Appeals, although felt very, very strong with where the appellate division decision led.
So that everybody's clear, we just found out today, I think, that there's an attempt to go back to the Court of Appeals. I believe it's the Court of Appeals, to ask for the right to appeal the decision. So, and I don't know how that'll play out. And that was what the question was, regarding permission to ask to appeal, and then the court will decide. And so it should, we'll see how that goes. I would imagine they're going to go no. And so Sasha, I've been involved in the calls, and for clarity purposes, with regards to the language, does the actual amendment appear on the ballot, and then there'll be like a piece above it that'll be explaining it in the 8th grade language, or is the ballot language going to replace the actual language of the ballot so it's understandable?
The language that you will see on the ballot in its totality will be written in 8th grade reading level or lower. So a title, a summary, and a yes/no statement.
Okay.
All of that in total has to be an 8th grade reading level or lower with a very specific word count. That's a gift to us. That's great. That helps us to really distill. Sometimes, I mean, I remember voting on ballot measures and I'm like, does anyone understand what this means? And so this is a really important thing for democracy, that we're actually putting this measure on the ballot simply written so folks can hopefully understand what it is that they're voting for.
Well, I have a question. How will what's the landscape? You described it a little bit about, there's a lot of states that are putting things on the ballot and addressing not just the abortion. How is New York State's going to be the leader in this, right? And how expansive will it be? And will this have an influence on the national landscape, on the conversation, or how the laws might play out?
Absolutely. So some of you may have seen an interesting article in the New York Times today about how the conversation around protecting abortion is not just about abortion anymore. Folks are talking about the real impact to pregnancy outcomes, pregnancy decisions. I'll see if I can grab that article here. But what we're doing is actually setting a new standard and talking about the importance of protecting our rights and reproductive freedoms through this brand new framework. As I mentioned, the New York Equal Rights Amendment, the exact language that we're using, our friends in Minnesota, Oregon, and very likely Illinois are looking at almost identical measures on their ballots in 2026. What we want to try to do is to set a new standard and actually figure out the plan to win back our rights federally. Now, certainly, if we have a trifecta in leadership, that there's a pro-choice trifecta where the U.S. Senate, the U.S. House, and the president all support access to reproductive freedom, we're having a different conversation then, right? Like theoretically, we can move things in a different way. But until then, and I hope for that day, but until then, Dobbs told us we must go back to the states. And so we need to go back to every state and ensure that we have the strongest possible protections. Thanks, Mary Kate, for that. This article sort of demonstrates the urgency, not just around abortion access, because it's not only about abortion access. This is about people's freedom to make their own decisions about their reproductive health care and keeping the government out.
Barbara Grush had a question.
So I've started doing some speaking on this subject, and I'm finding that it's very confusing to people that it's called an equal rights amendment, but what they're actually most interested in is abortion rights. And that, you know, you have that long list of parallel things, age, nationality, whatever, and reproductive healthcare choice just, it doesn't seem like it parallels. So I'm just wondering, like, what's the first 20 words you say? I mean, I guess you gave it. You said it protects our rights and freedoms.
Exactly. This is an
But it
amendment.
just doesn't seem to follow from being the equal rights amendment. That's what's tripping me up a little bit.
Sure, great. That's a great point. So the term equal rights amendment was given to us by our bill sponsors. The reality is that we're not tethered to that name. We're calling it equal rights amendment because it's the name that we have. But the ballot language, the title may actually be a little bit different. You might imagine something like amendment to protect rights, amendment to protect reproductive rights, amendment to protect rights and freedoms. We have suggested language that resonates based on language that we tested. But the reality is that this is in the hands of the New York State Board of Elections, and it can go anywhere.
Oh, okay. That's
why. So you might be familiar with campaigns all over the country. Yes on 1, yet the Florida ballot measures, yes on 4. We don't even have a ballot number yet. There is an effort in New York City, for those of you who follow the news in New York City, to put some measures on the ballot in New York City. And so we believe we're going to be #1 on the ballot all across the state. I'm not going to believe anything until I see it. We want everything in ink and in writing before I create a whole bunch of postcards and palm cards that say yes on 1, and then we're like 2 or 3. So we're going to have that ballot language by or before July 5th, which is next week. Can't believe it, but next week.
So I just, before I shut my mouth, I'll just say that I've been amazed at how few people know what's going on. So like lots of league members still don't know about the ERA. I've talked to, I did an event for the Human Rights Council. What do they call it? HRC. Most of them had never heard that there was such an amendment on the ballot. I went to a Juneteenth event and was just stopping people and saying, have you heard about this? And nobody had heard about it. So when you were saying that it could be used to turn out voters, we have to reach those low propensity voters, those young people and those don't always vote people, because they won't come out if they don't hear about it, and they're not hearing about it.
Exactly. That's why we're starting this work. We started to build this campaign, this coalition last year. And also we've had 4 elections in New York this year already. We've had 2 special elections, a presidential primary, and we have a primary tomorrow. And so I am thinking about the November election every day. And the reality is that we didn't even want to push information out until after tomorrow's primary, because when there's just one election that we're all focused on, one deadline, one early voting period, one voter registration deadline, et cetera, then and only then are we going to double down on that message. Folks, when they hear this, it's new to a lot of people. They hear it when they come and go. And the reality is that people don't really start plugging in until the last 6 weeks before the election. And even 6 weeks might be generous. Maybe they're paying attention to the presidential. They know what's happening, but for local races, unfortunately, we have a lot of work to do to keep our people engaged in this fight. So that's why we're talking to all of you. And we hope that you'll be with us in really educating folks across our communities about the importance of this measure.
Paula had a question. Unmute, mute.
Unmute, sorry. I thought I unmuted and I must have remuted. I just wanted to know where the proposed ballot language will be posted for public comment.
Yeah, it'll be on the Board of Elections website. And as soon as we have that link with the languages and some guidance as to how the campaign would invite people to comment, we'll be sending that out as part of our coalition. So I'm going to drop a couple of links in the chat. I see Peter's question. I see Patricia's question and then Peter's question as well. But I'll drop some links. If you join the coalition, that first link, you can then get regular invitations to the calls that we host. And we'll be sending guidance to that distribution list as well when ballot language is posted,
Thank you.
of course.
And so Peter asked, to what extent does the language of the proposal afford protections not only for abortion and reproductive rights, but also to the issues of, to other issues of potential concern? The amendment does address specific groups and constituencies. And so Sasha could explain that.
Yeah, of course. So the New York Equal Rights Amendment is adding protections to our state constitution against discrimination by the government on the basis of somebody's age, disability, pregnancy outcomes, reproductive health decisions, autonomy, gender expression, sex, sexual orientation, national origin, and ethnicity. So we have a lot of laws that protect all of the communities or people who experience discrimination on the basis of their identity that fits into those categories. We have incredibly strong civil rights laws and human rights laws, but those could change at any time. Somebody who doesn't support those things could come into office and say, forget about it. And if you didn't think that that was something so far-fetched, talk to our friends in Florida who never thought that rights would be rolled back in Florida the way that they have, or Ohio, or so many states that have seen a really significant shift and huge loss in access to healthcare, especially, but also so many rights and freedoms that people think are rock solid. It's those state constitutional amendments that ensure that they are enshrined in states' strongest founding legal documents for the long term.
Yeah, I think the clarity around the specificity in the Constitution instead of book laws that are on the books, because you could get a whole new legislature and everything can change.
And folks may recall, here in New York, we didn't even codify protections to abortion in our public health law until 2019.
Right.
It took taking out the IDC, passing the Reproductive Health Act. And so we were ready for DOPS because our state law was finally updated to ensure that abortion protections didn't live in our criminal code as they did for over half a century, but instead lived in our public health code. That's what the Reproductive Health Act did. But that was in 2019. Pro-choice leaders have only had majorities in our state legislature for 8 of the last 58 years. So this is a state that made it really hard, in spite of what people may say, in spite of how blue. It's a big diverse state, much more purple and in some cases red than people believe. And there's a huge diversity in opinion, including among our state legislature. There are anti-choice bills that get introduced every single session, every single year. And so ensuring that we take this moment to remind ourselves of the threat to codify these rights and protections in our state constitution is essential. Sure, Paula, do you want to jump in with your comment?
Well, I just went to the form and I was going to register, and I'm just wondering if the fact that asking for information on organization and your role is going to turn off, because there might be people who aren't involved in an organization, just as a citizen, want to do the postcarding.
Totally.
That sort of turned me off. I was gonna, I was thinking, I'm just a citizen, I want to do, I belong to the voters, I just want to do postcarding. And I thought, can't I just sign up as a interested citizen?
Of course you can. You can check, say NA. It's helpful to know what organizations are participating because there's so many groups around the state that are already engaged. So yes, you can feel free to just say no organization. Totally fine.
Okay, all right. Pat Maxon has a question too. Pat, do you want to unmute?
I think I finally remembered to unmute. Two things I think of about as we're talking about voters, you were talking about waiting until the right moment and to get the information out and then, bringing it on them. But two things come to mind. One is that back in the winter when we had the other primary election, voters seemed to get very jazzed. The people who were jaded and didn't want to vote for the candidates that were on the ballot went in and just voted their ballot. They reserved their right until later. And I think they felt sort of empowered doing this weird thing. So my job as a poll inspector, make sure you turn your ballot over you know, people don't want you to notice, but it's on the other side. Make sure you look. I think that's something that we can advocate a great deal. You know, if you're feeling world weary about everything on your ballot, make sure you get out to vote. Flip it over. You can just do that if you have to. And they probably will vote on the other things once they get aggravated. But it did seem to me that having something mechanical that was different than they were expected to do appealed to people.
Yeah. Yeah, that's helpful. It reminds people who are already there. And just as a reminder, we've seen huge drop off on ballot measures in New York. 20 or 30% of voters don't even flip their ballots. In 2021, when those voting rights measures appeared on the ballot, 30% of voters in New York City, in the 5 boroughs, didn't even flip their ballot. So
Yeah.
what Patricia is outlining, that poll workers have a really important role to play here to remind people to flip their ballot. That's not telling you how to vote. That's just saying there's a thing that you might want to weigh in on the
Right.
ballot. I know when I go to my polling place, our incredible poll workers who work very, very hard now through a long early voting cycle, always make sure to share that information. But that's not true in every part of the state. So.
And the other piece is that beforehand, if we have a somewhat more sympathetic audience or someone who's listening to the issues, we can say, it took us a long time to get this on here. This is our chance. Don't blow it.
Don't blow
Turn it
folks.
over.
Totally.
Ballot design is an important question. You know, Sasha, there was Barbara made a comment about lack of awareness, and it seems contradictory, but it would seem once more of the opposition gears up, there'll be much more awareness. So like what is the New York State, the New Yorkers for Equal Rights and the coalition planning? Are they going to be confronting that type of opposition, or is it just going to be, I know you're ramping up the campaign. I've seen new people being hired. How is that going to be addressed?
Christine, you're specifically saying how are we going to address the opposition outright, or just tell me a
Well, I
little bit.
guess will it be addressed? Will you be addressing it outright, or is it just that the opportunity becomes to organize around it and have people organizing, getting out the
So,
message?
Absolutely. So we're going to run our race, and we're going to educate voters about what this ballot measure is and what it does, with your help, of course.
Right.
We can't do that alone. And, you know, the opposition's going to do what they're going to do in that top line message doc that I dropped in the chat, and I'll send all this to you via email as well, so you have it handy. We address some of the opposition questions. We're not leading with their message. We have no reason to. They're going to say whatever they're going to say.
Exactly.
Okay. Cool. We need to run our race and talk to voters about what this is and make sure our message gets out first before the opposition's does.
Right. So the deadline that we'll be waiting for is July 5th.
July 5th or sooner. Could be
Is
sooner.
is for the language, and
Yep.
then there was a second one, which is
July
the
11th is our filing deadline. And for those of
Okay.
you who are in a position to donate,
and
every
the-
dollar.
and there'll be public comment. What dates?
So for 15 days after the language is posted, but we don't, you know, it could be July 3rd, it could be July 1st, it could be a little bit earlier, but there's a 15-day period when the BOE is accepting public comment, and that clock starts once the ballot language is posted. So we're not saying exact date because the ballot language could be posted tomorrow potentially, and we're ready for that, and we'll get hopefully a heads up from the BOE. We're in touch with them, of course, and so we'll know.
Mary Kate?
So your organization, this organization is going to make suggestions about comments that could be made on the ballot language.
Yep.
So that we are agreement about where we're going with this.
Correct.
And that'll come in an email.
Correct. So if you
Okay.
join the coalition, the first link I dropped, we'll have your email. You'll get regular emails from me and now from my colleague, Gina Baldwin, organizing director for the campaign. And so we'll be sending guidance out. Our next coalition call, we meet biweekly on Fridays. Our next coalition call is in fact on July 5th. So if you sign up to join the coalition, you'll get an email from us and you'll get very, very explicit guidance on that call.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'll make sure that we send out an email that now that it's settled with, and we have to send out everybody to sign up for this stuff. And and I think you're going to be getting with your organizers and more of the message getting out. You guys are going to get very, very busy over the next
Exactly.
few weeks or next
Exactly.
few months.
Yep. That's right. That's right. We're very soon also posting job descriptions for regional organizers. So we're eager to hire some more capacity in key regions of the state that we know will be engaging voters and talking to folks.
Peter asked a good question, and I meant to ask this myself. So the far-right extremists about abortion appear to want to go beyond Dobbs and prohibit contraception as well. Will the ERA language have sufficient protections for contraception? And I was wondering too about IVF. That's been on the table, and it's a big conversation that's getting people riled up, even in the Bible Belt, that they can't use IVF. So how is that going to tie in all together?
Great question. So yes, the ERA, reproductive health decisions, autonomy, pregnancy outcomes, the summation of that covers contraception, covers assisted reproductive technology care like IVF, the full spectrum of healthcare. It's bold, it's expansive, and also covers people who experience criminalization because they experience a miscarriage. There have been cases here in New York where a person who's pregnant is driving a car, gets into a car accident, and loses the baby in the process, or the fetus in the process. Obviously incredibly tragic situation. And people have been prosecuted in those cases, alleging that the driver is somehow committing manslaughter, et cetera, like horrible, the worst of the worst kinds of cases. And so this protects against all of that because it includes rock solid protections on the basis of pregnancy outcomes. Pregnancy outcomes includes abortion.
I think that that's a very important point to make too, about pregnancy outcomes being also for discrimination, just for either getting pregnant or having the miscarriage, which, like you said, is being criminalized in states. And, women have an accident or they just have a miscarriage. I don't think people realize women have 30% of pregnancies have result in a miscarriage. The lack of education around it is criminalizing women in a lot of different places.
Thanks. And I see Susan's note. Folks can just add not applicable in that line. And it's a required answer, but we'll add a disclaimer. Thanks for that flag. So far, it's only been organizations. So you don't have to put an organization name, just put NA. Cool.
Well, we're coming up on 8 o'clock. Did anyone have another question? Did I miss a hand or?
Thank you, Christine and Sasha. This was excellent.
Thank you all. I'm so glad to be with you. I'll send, I'm dropping these links one more time here, so you'll have them handy. I'm gonna make sure Christine has them and she can send them out. My colleague, Gina Baldwin, is our organizing director for the campaign. She'll be in touch. You'll hear a whole lot from her in the months to come. And thank you all. We cannot do this without you. It is truly a team effort, a team of organizers all across the state of New York. I'm excited for what we can build together, and I'm thrilled to go out there and win. So thank you.
very
Thanks for
much.
having me.
Thank you. Thank you for coming.
All right. Bye. Thanks.
Bye.
Folks. Have a good rest.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody. Thank you, Paula.
You're welcome. I'll send out, I'll try, if the chat does get saved, so I can go to
Stop recording. Stop recording.
the